Joey Cooker.
Hello, everyone. I have one admirer in the room, my dad. I paid him. The reality of it is tonight we're here and the country's in trouble. We all know that. We can talk about it till we're blue in the face. We all do, a lot of us. We can list all the problems. Faith is now bigotry. Debt is now prosperity. Up is now down. And we're all just bumfuzzled, for lack of a better word. The people that are here tonight, we're speaking to the choir. If you're here tonight, you care. But the reality of it is also most of your neighbors and friends that were invited, they didn't come, or they don't care, or they think that we're being alarmists. History says we're not alarmists. While the other side is well-funded, very active, very organized, our side is fragmented and underfunded. Sometimes it's hard for Joanne to even get gas money. But the other side has MoveOn.org. They've got everything else, for America, organizing for America. So all this to say this. Tom Selgas is a guy that for 25 years has really been doing what he says we all should be doing, but he's really been standing by his principle. I admire him a lot. I thought I was pretty smart until I met Tom. Now I think I'm pretty dumb. Tom has over 20 patents. I would consider him a genius, even though that would embarrass him. He's from the north, but now since he lives in Texas, we accept him. But he goes all over the country and talks to people about sound money and the Constitution. So it's an honor to introduce him tonight. And he's going to talk not about the problems. We all know about those, but hopefully he's going to talk about some constitutional solutions that some of us can apply to our own lives and maybe help him out a little bit. Tom Selgas.
Okay, is my mic on? Okay. We on now? Can you hear me? Great. Well, again, I thank you for having me this evening. It's a pleasure to be back. It's a pleasure to see many familiar faces again. I'm here to talk about something slightly different. As Joey said, I mainly focus on the monetary or the power of the purse provisions at the United States Bill of Rights Foundation. The president of the Bill of Rights Foundation, Dane von Breikenregard, he mainly focuses on the power of the sword provisions. We've successfully brought to the Supreme Court the Heller v. D.C. case, which kind of restored some of our Second Amendment provisions. And we've tried on a number of occasions to bring some power of the purse cases. As a matter of fact, I got so mad in May when I filed a petition for what's called a petition for rehearing. I told the court, how dare you take two cases on homosexuality, has nothing to do with the Constitution, is completely immoral, and has nothing to do with anything relative to what your functions are in this court, and yet you won't address the issue, specifically dealing with the power of the purse, what the Constitution defines as $1, and you're not going to take that case? Shame on you. Shame on you. I just had a vent. Well, I'm here today to talk about what I call putting the federal genie back in its bottle. I'm going to turn this, I think this other mic is still on. I'm going to move it over here so there won't be any feedback. How about that? Okay, so I'm going to ask a question. Is your line drawn in the sand? Is your line drawn in the sand? There were 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence. They drew their line in the sand. And I want you to know that those 56 people, those 56 men, were actually fairly well-to-do men. There were 24 that were lawyers and jurists, 11 were merchants, 9 were well-to-do farmers. The rest were fairly well-off in other endeavors, and yet they risked everything they had. They made a pledge for the support of this declaration With firm reliance on the protection of the divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. These men literally held to that pledge. Most of them ended up destitute. A good dear friend of mine, State Representative Phil Hart out of Idaho, his great-great-grandfather, his great-great-great-grandfather, was one of the signers, one of those 56 men from New Jersey. They called him Honest John Hart. He was the leader of there. He worked diligently. He had about the only thing that was left from his huge farm were papers and notes that he had exchanges with Thomas Jefferson when he was writing this document. He was destitute. The British raped his wife. We don't hear those type of things often, but that's what happened. That's what these men were willing to do. And I hate to tell you now, folks, we're almost at that point now. Actually, I think we are at that point. We have to make a decision. Are you willing to draw that line in the sand? I hear it all too often. Well, if they come this far, I'll go. And then, I'll draw the line this way, and I'll draw the line this way. Well, next thing you know, your back's against the wall. I know Thomas Jefferson said, while evils are sufferable. But now's the time to stop this. I don't want anyone to get offended by this next slide. But I have what I call today's signers. These are people I've gotten to know here in East Texas. George Stevenson, Joanne Fleming, John Twiddell, John Furlow, Joey Coker. These people in my mind have already signed the new declaration. And it's not so much a declaration of independence, it's a declaration to restore independence. It's a declaration to put the federal genie back in its box, to put it back in its constitutional confines. And if I missed your name, tell me. I'll add it to the list. Okay? I'm not embarrassed or ashamed. I'm proud of each of you. I was telling George when he walked in this evening, I am so blessed that I got to see him speak at an event in Canton, Texas, back in 2009, I guess it was. And I cornered him, and I said, George, you and I need to talk. Since then, I would say we've become close friends. I've been fighting this battle with these people on this other column at the national level. I've only been in it for 25 years. D.V. Kidd and Dr. Edwin Vieira and Larry Becraft started this after Richard Nixon signed an executive order removing us off the gold standard. So they've been in it many years longer than I have, but I was blessed to get to know Larry, who introduced me to Edwin, who then became my law professor, and I was so blessed from that sometimes you wish you took the blue pill rather than the red pill, but knowing the truth, you have a responsibility from that. So first of all, we need to understand some basics. We have what is called the Organic Law of the United States, and that constitutes 4 documents: the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, which a lot of people seem to forget about, the Northwest Ordinance, which most people have never heard of, and of course the Constitution of the United States. And Congress over and over again, and as recently as 2007, have declared these 4 documents to be the organic law. What does that mean? All laws that we have derive from these 4 documents. And you think, well, wait a minute. The Articles of Confederation have been repealed. So why is that part of the organic law? Well, it explains to you certain terms that are in the Constitution. And unless you read the Articles of Confederation, you will never know what the definition of those terms were. Okay? And so that's why you need to understand these the Articles of Confederation and the Northwest Ordinance, to understand some of these aspects of the power of the purse and the power of the sword. So, one of the keys at the end of this, I'm going to tell you, is you need to read these 4 documents. You can find them online now. It won't take you all that long. It might take you longer to look up some of the meanings of the words that aren't used in today's language. As a matter of fact, we were out at lunch today, and there was an officer with us, and he was telling me a little story. And he said there was a wood log hauler over there in East Texas who came in, and he used to work at Kroger and was the assistant manager, and they called him over to the video department. And he said, I returned this video on time. And he said, Hamlet, boy, I have a wolf in the sheep's clothing here, you know. And he says, so did you enjoy Hamlet? And he says, no, it was the King James Version. In other words, the Old English. So kind of funny. But so if you don't know the definition of certain words, yes, they're written in the King James Version. You have to take a look at some of the dictionaries. And there's plenty of dictionaries that are around today, but the Old English words are so rich, they're so particular, and it will give you an insight into what we need to know. Okay, so the Declaration of Independence acknowledges and understands government tyranny, right? That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is your right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute new government. I don't think we have to go that far. But what we have to do is we have to restore government. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty. This is why this is so important for you to understand the organic law. Because, men, it is our duty. It's not just a right. We can't sit on the sidelines. It is our duty to throw off such government.
Amen.
And if you don't like that, or you're afraid, I'm going to ask you, I'll close my eyes and you can leave now. I'm serious. Because we need people to stand up who are willing to put a target on their back. And I will tell you something. I have had a target on my back. It started in 1989. Okay? The federal government has tried and tried and tried to get an indictment for me for all different things. And the Lord has blessed me. I have stood the test, and I'm sure I'm going to receive more tests. But I have learned a lot of things through that process. My wife is a CASA volunteer, and she had a case this evening. Otherwise, she wanted to be here tonight. But God bless me for having her, because she has stood and been with me through those trials. Trials back when the IRS absconds and locks up all your physical assets and gives you, I think it was like $75 a month that we got to spend. They were taking care of the house bills while they were investigating us. Okay? That went on for about 3 years. Okay? My wife stuck with me. But I'll tell you, after that experience, and then the agreement we made with them, I said, okay, we'll never have this happen again. And then the gall of those people 3 years later. I have it on this computer, but I didn't include it in this presentation. I have a document that says, Mr. Selgas, we changed your tax return. And we're charging you penalties and interest for overpaying us too much.
What?
Yes, I can. Maybe during the question and answer, I'll show that document to you. And it's like, you got to be kidding me. I just threw. In other words, they wanted to keep the overpayment plus wanted more. And everybody said to me, you were crazy. Just pay it was only a couple $100 more. I said, no, it's a principle. It's the principle. And so from then on, I have taken it upon myself to understand what the power of the purse is. I'll leave it at that for now. So, the Constitution gives some express congressional powers, and I've separated these into peacetime powers and war and homeland security powers. And many of you have heard my good friend, law professor Edwin Vieira speak before. He wrote a book when he was here the last time called Constitutional Homeland Security. He's followed up with a much larger one now, which details all the homeland war provisions on the Second Amendment. Prior to that, he wrote a book back when Ronald Reagan first got elected called Pieces of Eight. It was about 300 pages. When I got to meet him, I got to work with him peripherally on the bigger version and then the reconstitution of the bigger version called Pieces of Eight, which deals all with the monetary powers of the United States. And these powers here are powers specifically granted to the government by we the people. And there's actually one other one that's not, I didn't have room to put up there, which is treason. But you'll hear about that in a few moments on a video that I've included in. These are the powers of the government. No more, no less, and that's what we said you're allowed to do. When they go outside of that, they have broken their covenant, their contract, their constitutional responsibility with us. We the people have two basic rights to thwart that. The first, Congress shall make no, what? No. Abridging the right of the people to petition the government for redress of grievances. Now, what the federal government likes to tell you is, well, you can give us, redress us, but we don't have to answer, we don't have to pay attention to you. That's what they say today. But if you look at the history of it, the Continental Congress said that the right of redress before taxes was a means by which the public tranquility was to be maintained. So in other words, they always viewed the right to redress under the Articles of Confederation was one that you held your tax money from the government until they came to the table. Okay? And if you read Madison's Federalist Papers, he says that over and over again. It goes in cooperation with what the Articles of Confederation said. It goes in cooperation with basically even the Declaration of Independence. It's the peaceful way to solve the problem. Because frankly, the only reason you behave the way you behave today is because the government's controlling you through what? The power of the purse. They're telling you, this is the way we're going to manipulate you, because if you don't do this, we're going to take all your money away. And it's a peaceful way to do something, isn't it? Oh, you didn't pay your tax, so you're a bad boy. Okay? Well, we'll talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes. The second is we, the people, have the right to withhold our money from the government. Otherwise, our grievances and petitions would fall on deaf ears. So, our first and foremost right is the right of redress. And in that is the right to withhold your money from the government. And I'm going to tell you now, and they'll probably come arrest me in the next 2 weeks if this is going to be posted on the internet. Because they'll say I'm going to, I'm fooling with the fair and due administration of the Internal Revenue Service. But Obamacare is unconstitutional from the word go. I don't care if Judge Roberts wants to call it a tax. They cannot force me to participate in one of their insurance schemes. I meant to bring in a paper I got this morning out of Washington, D.C. From the Freedom Foundation on what all data the IRS is now going to have on you. All the medical data and other things. It is scary. it violates your Fourth Amendment right. So I'm not going to participate in that. Is the audio connected there? Okay, I'm going to start a little video here.
They have different interests, different beliefs, different occupations, but for the most part, they got along pretty well. Then one day, a gang of a few hundred people showed up. Need to zoom in some more to see them. I know they're there somewhere. Zoom in. There they are. And this gang of a few hundred said to the throng of 100 million, "From now on, you all have to give us a cut of everything you earn."
This is an accurate graphical comparison between the number of American taxpayers and the number of U.S. congressmen.
And the throng said, "Gosh, do we have to give you a cut of what we earn?" And the gang of a few hundred said, "Yes, you have to." And the throng said, "Well, okay, I guess we have to." And one little troublemaker asked, "What if we don't?" The gang of a few hundred didn't like this and said, "If you do not comply, we shall unleash upon you our legions of enforcers." And the throng cried, "Oh no, please don't. We will comply, we will pay."
This is an accurate graphical comparison between the number of American taxpayers and the total number of IRS employees.
Time went by, and the gang of a few hundred said, "Now we want more of what you earn." And this kept happening over and over again, until eventually some of the throng were paying almost half of what they earned to the gang. Whenever the gang demanded more, the throng would say, "Golly, we're already having a tough time. Do we really need to give you even more?" And the gang always said, "Yes, you must, or we shall unleash our legion of enforcers." Now the gang of a few hundred was getting trillions of dollars every year, spending it on wars and pyramid schemes, giving away goodies to their friends, buying influence, and doing lots of other things. And some of the throng started saying, "We don't really like the war you're waging with the money we give you. Do we really have to be paying for that?" And the gang said, "Yes, we demand it. Don't make us send out our legion of enforcers." And some of the throng said, "You're taking our money and giving it to huge corporations and giant banks, and some people who just don't want to work. A lot of these things we don't like." And once upon a time, there
I'm
were...
sorry. Well, basically, you get the gist of what happened. We, the people, are in control. We outnumber them by who knows how many. I mean, they showed 100 million taxpayers up there. I don't think there really are that many. There's a lot who file returns but actually pay no tax. And so we outnumber them. Okay, our second thwart is something that most people don't realize, which is the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia. I know the M word is a bad word to most people, but it's a constitutional word. It's an entity that is created by the state and commanded by the governor. A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state. It's necessary for us to have a security of the free state. I realize there are volunteers down at the border now, but this is really a militia, state militia function that the governor should have in place. And every able-bodied man, pick an age limit, we should have to do a couple of weeks' time down there. It's kind of our duty for our state. Okay? But this is a function that comes from the state government. And the word militia has been so, I'm going to use the word bastardized, that's what it has been, by the media, that it no longer carries what our founding fathers understood it to mean. It's not some guys out in camouflage playing cowboys and Indians or whatever it is that they do out there. No, it's a well-regulated structure with good moral character, with the old Boy Scout law that I knew, with people who are willing to give their lives for this state and for this country, for the principles of this state and this country that are in conformance with the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of Texas. When the people fear their government, there is tyranny. When the government fears its people, there is liberty. The Second Amendment, guaranteeing a free state, always kept the federal government at bay. It knew that the governor had a coordinated, disciplined, trained team of people to protect the state from any over-encroachment of the federal government or any invasion from the south or from the north or east or west for that matter, but the people crossing our borders. There are three basic rights that they've given us to thwart the judiciary. Although the judiciary has taken some time to work around some of these, we still have these. We have the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, and the Seventh Amendment. Grand jury, impartial jury, trial by jury. Jury is the key operative word here. Our founding fathers understood that without a trained citizenry understanding what our founding principles were, that judges could pervert the law, and they have, absolutely. They could pervert the law, and we'd be stuck where we are today. So how did we get in trouble? Well, let me make some observations. First, religious leaders have succumbed to political pressure.
Yes. Amen.
And they perverted the Word of God. That's right. Judges perverting the law and abusing their power. Congress abandoning their duty to maintain the pure metallic standard value of money. The executive branch uses unconstitutional fiefdoms, i.e. all these little isms organizations, three-letter organizations they have all over the place. And we, the people, are paralyzed by what I call government-created FUD. And FUD is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That's what they do. They plant in your mind a seed of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And that's how we got in trouble. I'm going to take a look at each one of these. This time I'm going to set the remote down when the video comes on, because these next two videos are full of meat that I want you to hear. So the religious leaders, as I've said, have succumbed to political pressure. The Lord said, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." Isn't that the truth? The religious leaders have succumbed to political pressure and perverted the meaning that you read in Romans 13, 1 and 2, and 1 Peter 2, 13 and 14. The government only has to be obeyed when they're within the confines of the Constitution and God's law. A government that says you can abort a child at any age is a government that's lost. Okay, here's our next video.
Other examples in the Bible where people did not obey civil government. Daniel 6 tells you how Daniel disobeyed the written law of the land. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel chapter 3, they not only disobeyed the law of the land, they disobeyed to the face of Nebuchadnezzar. He said, "If you don't obey me, what God is he who will deliver you out of my hands?" They said, "Be it known unto you, O king, our God can deliver us. But whether he delivers us or not, that's his business. But be it known unto you, we will not bow down." Blatant disobedience. and God spared them. God blessed them. When you come to the New Testament, hey, the Apostle Peter and the other apostles said in Acts 5 and verse 29, we ought to obey God rather than man. And then finally in Acts chapter 5, there's an illustration where God himself moved to overthrow the edicts of the rulers. They had taken the apostles, had thrown them into prison, and had told them not to preach. But the Bible says by night, God sent an angel and unlocked the prison doors and said, go and preach to the people all the words of this life. So God let them out, and God said, you do exactly opposite of what your rulers are telling you to do. So it's very obvious then in Romans chapter 13 that the submission that is demanded is not an absolute and unconditional submission. It is rather a general submission. And I might add this. The general submission that is demanded of people in Romans 13 verses 1 and 2 is conditioned upon the rulers being what God has ordained them to be in verses 3, 4, and 6. They are to be God's rulers. They are to be God's ministers, God's deacons, God's servants, God's exactors of righteousness, and God's public worship. When the rulers are those things, then we have to submit, because they would then, in that case, be the ordinance of God.
What if our laws are contrary to God's law?
Once again, we have to take the attitude that Peter did in Acts 5 and verse 29. We ought to obey God rather than man. You see, the submission that God demands in Romans chapter 13 is to lawful authority. God never demands that we submit to unlawful, usurped, tyrannical authority. The state has no business leaving the lawful area and sphere of authority that God has given to it. When it does, it has no binding influence. It has no binding power at all. The interesting thing is, the Constitution of the United States even says this as well. Did you know that the Constitution said that this Constitution and the laws made in pursuance thereof, that is, in agreement with the Constitution, and all treaties which are made in agreement with the Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land. And it says that all the judiciary shall be so bound. The Constitution or the laws of any state notwithstanding. In other words, no state, no group of people, no one has any right to pass a law, a statute, or an ordinance that conflicts with the Constitution of the United States. If they do, then that law is null and void, ab initio, from the beginning. It has no binding power. And the Constitution said the judiciary shall so declare. So neither in the Word of God nor in the Constitution are the people bound to obey usurped tyrannical authority. Now it is true that there is a lawful governmental authority. And we as Christians are not anarchists. We want to be submissive to a lawful, godly government. We're ready to. But God never requires us to submit to tyranny and to submit to a dictatorship. He never requires us to do that which is contrary to the Word of God or contrary to His law. Now, God has given us government to be a blessing to us. In fact, the purpose of government is spelled out very plainly in Romans 13 verses 3 and 4 and 1 Peter 2 and verse 14. Government is for the punishment of evildoers and for the protection of the good doers. And so very obviously, God is not going to take that which He has ordained for our good and turn it around and let it be for our bad and an instrument of bondage and enslavement. So there is no submission owed to tyranny. Let me show you. I could not look at my wife and say, sweetheart, we're short on money this month. I want you to take this pistol and go rob the bank so I can have enough money to pay my bills. Why could I not do that? You say, but Brother Weaver, the Bible says, wives, obey your husbands in everything. And the Bible does say that in Ephesians chapter 5. I could look at my wife and say, God says you've got to obey me in everything. Now take this pistol and go rob the bank. You know what she should say? She should say, honey, I love you. And I want to be submissive to you. But God has never given you authority to violate His law. God has never given you authority to command me to go contrary to the Word of God. I want to obey you. But in this instance, I have to obey God rather than man. I cannot rob that bank. Now, very obviously, my authority as a husband is limited. I do not have the authority to command her to go contrary to the Word of God. Likewise, the authority of the government is limited. It does not have the authority to ask us to do anything that's contrary to the Word of God or even contrary to the Constitution of the United States.
I think that sums that up. On my website for document holding, www.npn.net, I have John Weaver's series of lessons. The video recordings are, you can find, they're 6 10-minute segments that he has posted on YouTube. But the whole series is about a 5-hour program. He's got a book called Christians and Civil Government. And I would recommend that you either go listen to the tape, the audio series, put it on your iPod, or listen to it on the computer if you can. And take that and listen to it and then pass that to your preachers. Because your preachers need to understand that submitting to government is required when government is obeying the laws that God has set out and in our country put within the constitutional confines. And when the laws and ordinances don't fall within that scope, that government has gone astray and gone awry. Next thing, judges and prosecutors perverting the law and abusing their power. Judicial Tyranny was written by a friend of mine, Jeff Dickstein. He lives up now in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And he said the law for political and financial motives has been subverted. It has been undermined by our federal judiciary. Dr. Edwin Vieira Jr., in his book, Dethrone the Imperial Judiciary, wrote, one of the most important constitutional issues of our generation, and for us, the people, to understand, is the ability for the people to enforce true law by restraining runaway activist judges. And how you stop that is frankly in the courtroom. I can see what's happening now, this whole Trayvon Martin thing. I can't tell you what the facts were. I wasn't in the jury box. I didn't see any of the evidence. I don't know what was there. I didn't watch any of it. But all I can tell you is that I have served on juries before. I was a juror in a murder trial. I was a juror in a little civil matter. And I was a juror in a traffic violation case. So I've been on a jury 3 times. And I know, based on the facts and the evidence and all good conscience, on all 3 of those cases, that we made the right decision, whether the rest of the public agreed with us or not. And we have a system in this country of justice that is set up that way. And I believe the jury selection, there is some flaws in it currently, but for the most part, the jurors are doing the best that they can. And whether people outside want to believe they have a bias or not, at least the people I served on didn't have any particular bias one way or the other. Whether it was black, white, Hispanic, Indian, didn't matter. What you looked at is the facts and the situation that was presented in the evidence. when we see what we're having today for political motives, for political and financial motives, we have a subversion of the law that shouldn't take place in this country. I'm going to run another video. This one's a little bit louder, so I'll have you turn that down a moment. There would be one more point, which was the other part of the problem is prosecutorial misconduct. And the problem is most people aren't aware of this, but prosecutors have absolute immunity. Did you know that? They can bring a case against anyone they want, even knowing full well that that person is innocent, and they have absolute immunity from their behavior. So even though 201 criminal cases, the Justice Department prosecutors themselves violated the laws and ethic rules, they were never punished. And yet we the people, or those 201 cases, suffered consequences. Some years and years and years of their lives. There's something wrong when that happens. Here's the next video.
Judge Napolitano is going to talk to you a little bit about how the government doesn't have to follow its own laws. I'm going to talk about a topic that's just as frightening. The laws that the government expects you to follow. They become increasingly punitive, arbitrary, and bewildering. And that's due to three dangerous trends that are transforming the criminal law. The first is over-criminalization, the expansion of the criminal law to cover behavior that really ought to be handled by civil lawsuits or fines, or even to cover behavior that's just none of the government's business, period. The second is the out-of-control federalization of ordinary crime that the Constitution leaves to the states. And the third is the use of criminal law enforcement tactics, that is, handcuffs and jail, against ordinary nonviolent citizens who aren't crooks or thugs. Now, in a free society, as a preliminary matter, there ought to be very few offenses for which you can be locked up and taken to jail. Those offenses ought to be clearly defined. You ought to be able to look them up. And they ought to be limited to the kinds of behavior that we'd all recognize are the sorts of things you can rightfully lose your liberty for. Killing people, stealing from them, assaulting them, defrauding them. Serious matters. That's not the system we live under today. Over the past several decades, there's been this sort of unholy alliance between, on the one hand, tough on crime conservatives, and on the other hand, anti-big business liberals. And this has utterly reshaped the legal landscape. The result is that while violent crime often goes unpunished, you see Congress continuing to add these new trivial offenses to the federal criminal code. It's become, in a way, just another form of self-expression for Congress, a way to show that it's serious about whatever the given social problem of the month is, whether it's corporate scandals or steroid use. And the upshot of all this is it's now frighteningly easy for American citizens to be hauled off to jail for things that no sane person would regard as a crime. As Harvard law professor William Stuntz puts it, we're coming ever closer to a world in which the law in the books makes everybody a felon, and prosecutors and police get to define what the law on the street is and decide who has violated it. There's a famous speech warning about that some years ago by FDR's Attorney General and later Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson. And when Jackson started as Attorney General, he called together all the federal prosecutors and said, he gave them a speech warning about the temptations of their job. He said that with the law books filled with a great assortment of crimes, a prosecutor stands a fair chance of finding at least a technical violation of some act on the part of almost anyone. The great danger, Jackson said, is that he will pick people that he thinks he should get rather than pick cases that need to be prosecuted. Well, that danger's gotten dramatically worse. When Jackson gave that speech, the body of federal criminal law was less than half the size it is today. Today, there are around 4,000 crimes scattered throughout the tens of thousands of pages of the United States Code. I say around 4,000 because nobody's really sure. There are teams of expert legal researchers with a lot of resources from places like the American Bar Association, the Federalist Society, and the Congressional Research Service, and they've tried to count them, and they can't come up with an exact number. It was too complicated a task to figure out what was a crime and what wasn't, which means, of course, that the ordinary citizen doesn't have a chance. As you might expect, all of this happened in clear violation of the Constitution. There are only 3 specifically enumerated crimes in the Constitution: treason, piracy, and counterfeiting. Speaking of heightened criminal liability, right now there are 3 U.S. seafood dealers and 1 Honduran lobster fleet owner doing hard time in federal prison for importing the wrong size lobster tails and packaging them in clear plastic bags rather than cardboard boxes. They ran afoul of the Lacey Act, which is a federal statute that makes it a crime to import fish or wildlife taken in violation of any foreign law. Well, the foreign law that the U.S. government said they violated was a number of regulations in Honduran law. The U.S. government argued that these folks had broken Honduran law because some of the lobster tails in their shipment, 3% to be exact, were less than 5.5 inches long. Some of the shipment, 7%, contained some egg-bearing lobsters. And finally, because of this Honduran regulation, supposedly required them to be packed in boxes. Now, one problem with this theory of the case is that Honduras said the U.S. government was wrong about Honduran law. The Honduran embassy filed an amicus brief in the case saying the regulations were invalid and no laws had been violated. The Attorney General of Honduras and the Agriculture Secretary also provided evidence that this was the case. But in the interests of quote-unquote finality, the Federal Court of Appeals let the conviction stand. And because of that, Robert Blanford, Albert Schoenwetter, and Donald McNabb, 3 small business people with no prior criminal record, are now serving 8-year terms in federal prison. Their partner in crime, Diane Wong, a seafood importer with 2 kids, ages 6 and 10, she got off easy. She got 2 years, and she'll be out in July 2006.
We have a government at all levels that's gone amok. That Federal Circuit judges should have to suffer treble damages. They should be in jail for 24 years. Putting those 3 men in jail and that woman in jail for a law that doesn't even exist, this is the problem we face today. And it's a problem that would have never happened had we the people known that, wait a minute, is this piracy? No. Is this treason? No. Is this counterfeit? No. You're not guilty. It's as simple as that. He said at the beginning, the state's required and has the power to punish what we call the 6 sins of the 10 Commandments, okay? So murder, adultery, stealing, those type of things. The state can make its rules and do the punishment for that. Federal government's punishment is limited to those 3 items: treason, piracy, and counterfeiting. No more, no less. So until we understand that, we're going to have poor people suffering. In my observation, dealing with the federal courts and federal prison system, being with the United States Bill of Rights Foundation, I've been into the federal prisons to help people get out, innocent ones. And I will tell you that around 30% of the prison population are people who fall into this category. They were prosecuted for a law that doesn't exist in the interest of finality. Shame on those judges. Shame on the district court judge for even allowing it to go forward. Shame on the prosecutor. And until we, the people, wake up and understand what the Constitution demands, the federal Constitution demands, this will continue to happen. Because, oh, the judge said so. Well, hogwash on the judge saying so. His power stops where the Constitution stops. I didn't put it up here, but in Proverbs and in Deuteronomy, the Lord says, diverse weights and diverse measures are an abomination to the Lord. Our Constitution was set up with a dollar standard. And the word dollar appears twice in the Constitution, and those of you who have heard me speak before have heard me go through this, and I will show a couple of slides on that. But basically, we have here the Marigold decision from 1850. And we think, well, that's real old. But it was cited as recently as 2003, which I'll show in a minute. But it says, they, Congress, appertain rather to the execution of an important trust invested by the Constitution, and to the obligation to fulfill that trust on the part of the government, namely the trust and the duty of creating and maintaining a uniform and pure metallic standard of value. A dollar is a unit of weight of silver. The Constitution allowed for multiple metals to be used, but the weight of silver was always the fixed unit, and as market conditions changed, Congress could regulate the weights of those other metals against that known fixed unit standard. The power of coining money and of regulating its value was delegated to Congress by the Constitution for the very purpose as assigned by the framers of that instrument of creating and preserving the uniformity and purity of such standard of value. Diverse weights and diverse measures are an abomination. $1 is defined only one place in the United States Code today. By law, it's found in Title 31, Section 5112E. You can go, you can look it up at uscode.house.gov, the official law of the United States. uscode.house.gov. You can look up Title 31, Section 5112. $1 is only defined once. You can search for $1, the term $1 throughout the whole United States Code. There's only one definition. And that definition is a silver coin. And yes, that green note has been declared, parenthetically, a legal tender. But there's a provision in the law that says the Secretary shall maintain the equal purchasing power. Why? Because diverse weights and diverse measures are an abomination. Well, a $1 coin takes 18 one green notes to acquire today. So those green notes that you call $1 takes 18 bucks to acquire $1 today. If the medium which the government was authorized to create and establish could immediately be expelled and substituted by one it had neither created, who created this Federal Reserve note? The government created this Federal Reserve Board, this quasi-thing, but then the quasi-government agency created these 12 banks, and they created this thing. One possessing no intrinsic value. Treasury site even admits that. The dollars have no value for themselves, but what they can acquire in the marketplace. Then the power conferred by the Constitution would be useless, wholly fruitless to every end it was designed to accomplish. Whatever functions Congress are by the Constitution authorized to perform, they are, when the public good requires it, bound to perform, and on this principle, having admitted a circulating medium, a standard of value, indispensable for the purpose of the community and for the action of the government itself, they are accordingly authorized and what? Bound in duty. Here's that word duty again. Just like we have a duty they have a duty to prevent its disbasement and expulsion and the destruction of the general confidence and convenience. Folks, you've been swindled out of your capital and out of your money. And I'll show you a little demonstration of how that took place. Again, here's the International Bank Corp. In 2003 was cited the case here. The legislature knows the truth because during the period of Richard Nixon on April 15, 1971, until Ronald Reagan came in to power and asked the question, what are the constitutional requirements for our monetary system? Ronald Reagan hated the Federal Reserve Bank and the IRS with a passion. He wanted to get rid of them. So he asked the question and got a public law passed, and the conclusion was, in addition to the compelling economic case for a gold standard, a case buttressed by both historical and theoretical arguments, there is a compelling argument based upon the Constitution. The present monetary arrangements, this green note that you call money, of the United States are what? Unconstitutional, even anti-constitutional from top to bottom. We're never to have a fiat monetary system we have today. So I'm going to use an example with stocks. In 1962, you could buy 4 shares of IBM stock for roughly $2,000. It's 1942, which bought equivalent to 1942 silver certificates, which acquired about 5,424 cartons of brown eggs. If you had sold those in 1982, after the stock splits, those 4 shares became 75 shares, you would sell those, well, there was no lawful money available at that point in time, but $4,884, according to the banknote calculation. But yet, if you sold them for eggs, you would actually have a loss. In 2007, after more splits, there was now the 4 shares that you originally acquired in 62 were now worth 300 shares, and that came out to 30,501 green note dollars. But that only equaled $2,338.56 of silver dollars, which happened to buy about 6,571 cartons of brown eggs. So if I bought and sold the stock for eggs, I would have had a 17% gain. I would have had a tax due of 172 cartons of eggs. If I bought it and sold it for lawful money, I would have had a 17% gain. And I'd have a tax due about $59.48. But because I used these bogus certificates, they claim I had a 94% gain with a tax rate of 15% at that time. I would have had an effective tax rate of 83% rather than 15%. And so the purported gain is actually a quiet theft. And this is the problem with the fiat monetary system. They make you feel good, oh, I made more money, when in fact, you've been duped and they stole from you. That's the problem with the monetary system. That is diverse weights and diverse measures. That is why Congress requires the Secretary of Treasury to maintain the equal purchasing power. Those notes were never supposed to be deflated in value as much as they have been, i.e. the form of inflation we see. That's not supposed to happen. But it has because we, the people, have let them get away with it. The executive branch use of unconstitutional fiefdoms. We all know about the Benghazi thing and all the cover-up that's going on there. The film here in the middle, America from Freedom to Fascism. I'm in that film. I was one of the technical directors for that film, and yet now you're put on a watch list if you happen to be one of the people, the millions of people who downloaded that film on YouTube or rented it from Netflix. You've now been added to a watch list with these other 2 films. I'm not familiar with either of the other 2, but I was sent this a few weeks ago. I don't know if I've been added to the watch list. I've been able to fly still, so I know I can still get on a plane, but that's where we're coming to. You watch the wrong film that they don't like, you'll get added to the watch list. We now know that the DOJ was instrumental in the Trayvon Martin case. And then, of course, the IRS scandal is getting bigger. I just saw today that now it's come out that political targets the campaigns and other things, they were targeting those people to try to slow down their campaigns. I'll tell you, it's getting out of hand. It is getting out of hand. We, the people, are paralyzed by this government-created fight. FDR was flat wrong. There are two things that we have to fear, and that's fear God, and we have to fear a tyrannical government. The government would have you believe that it knows how to protect and take care of you better than you can yourself. We're the cradle-to-grave provider. That's what they want you to believe. Work for us, meaning go out and work. Give us everything you want. We'll make sure we distribute everything we need to secure our votes. But you keep working for us because we're going to take care of the Great Society. The government would have you believe that a paper note, that paper note with no intrinsic value is money. I sit around with some of my friends on that right column, and we often say to ourselves, it's amazing how well they duped this country into accepting this paper currency with no value as their money. It's just, it's beyond belief. Yeah, when they first said, hey, don't worry, you'll be able to redeem this for silver. And then they said, oh, you don't need to worry, we don't need to redeem it anymore. We'll just take it off. And then they didn't allow us to own gold. They wouldn't allow us to own silver, yet they were allowing the foreigners to take our gold and silver. The Constitution has a provision to prevent just that from happening. Okay, one of the functions of Congress was what? Regulate the value of money and of foreign coin. They were supposed to prevent that. The Congress was supposed to do that. Instead of making up all these other wacky laws, if they were doing the job they were supposed to be doing, it'd be full time. Instead, they're creating all sorts of political chaos for us. And the government would have you believe that your income tax money is used to run the government, and without it, the country would collapse. Well, I'll tell you something. This country ran from 1791 to 16, even though the act was passed in 1913, that act was found to be unconstitutional, so the 1916 act. But we have that period of time that this country ran without this whole income tax system we've got. And it had phenomenal growth and everything else. And then the Grace Commission report, which was also at the same time Public Law 96-389 came about, on this gold, the question of what the United States monetary requirement is, the Grace Commission report found that not one nickel of your income tax money goes to running the federal government. Go download it. You can download that off the internet. Go read it. Go read at least the opening summary and the conclusion. Not one nickel of your money goes to run the federal government. The federal government gets all its funding from the constitutional directives that it has on where it can get its money from. Your income tax money solely goes to the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Federal Reserve bankers to pay their bond debts, as well as social programs to facilitate the welfare of this country. Ha ha. So that's the FUD that these people create. Ronald Reagan wanted to fix this country. It's a shame more of us didn't understand that at the time. And the government would have us believe that it has the right to manipulate public opinion to promote its agenda. And I see that more and more and more. More so out of this administration than I can ever remember, although apparently Woodrow Wilson had done some things that are pretty similar. So, I'm just about to wrap up. So what can we do? As I told you at the beginning, let's read and learn our organic law. Exercise our First Amendment right. We need to organize and we need to redress the government. When I say to withhold our taxes, to show good faith, I want us to put our tax money in an escrow. So it's not like, hey, we're trying to scam with it or anything else. I'm going to have this held in escrow. The money's there, it's accounted for, and you, federal government, will get it after you come to the table, but not before. We need to get ourselves on grand juries and juries. When you're called for duty, jury duty, show up. Don't have a negative attitude. Get on there. Get on the jury. It's the only way to protect the innocent. We need to press our state representatives to reinstitute our state militia, which is necessary for the security of our free state. And then, lastly, we need to learn and make demands for lawful money as allowed under the law. Most people aren't aware of this, but the law states Federal Reserve notes shall be redeemable for lawful money on demand at the Treasury Department, in Washington District of Columbia, or at any Federal Reserve Bank. You want to put these people back in their box real quick? You get a couple 100,000 people around the Federal Reserve Bank in Dallas with your green notes demanding your lawful money. Bank in Philadelphia, the bank in San Francisco, the bank in New York. You want to scare them? That's how you scare them. So, I'll take questions now if there are any.
Yeah. I don't think I can be loud enough that night.
I appreciate your attendance here this evening, and I hope you all learned something.
Please repeat.
Are we up there again? Please repeat where we can find what we can hold back our taxes if our federal government, if they are not doing their constitutional duties, etc.
Okay. The redress for grievances. The redress for grievances provisions in the Constitution, in the First Amendment. The genesis of that, if you look at the discussions in the Federalist Papers as well as the congressional record on the floor, has the provision based through the Articles of Confederation and prior to that, even under English rule, that the easiest thing to do is look up redress for grievances withholding tax on Google search. If you do redress for grievances withholding tax, you will find, it'll take you to the National Archives Administration documents. You can find several documents as well as the Federalist Papers. Federalist 46 and 47 come to the top of my head instantly. There's a couple more citations that you can read specifically that redress for grievances included the provision to withhold your tax so you could bring a peaceful resolution. Because the last thing you want is, we don't want a civil war. I really don't want to pick up arms. There's an easier way to do that. That's what they do to us. The way they get us to behave is they manipulate or control us with the money. We should be able, and we have the right to do the same thing.
Tom, could you hold on just 1 second?
Sure.
I need to ask a question. Is anyone here that was waiting on a ride to pick them up? Anybody here? I'm asking. Okay, you might want to, your ride is here, and we thought we were maybe having a problem. So you need to see Matthew up front. Okay, Patty, I'm gonna give this back to you.
So whoever asked that question, did that answer the question for whomever asked it? If I hear a no, then I will. Okay.
Where do I sign up here tonight?
Joanne? Well, I think in the back table, is that correct?
Well, I think he's directing it towards your side. I know Al. So I think he wants more specific location, because he's a member of ours.
Listen, if you're joining up with the grassroots organization here, you are participating in what's necessary to bring this resolution. John Twiddell, what's your organization in Hideaway called?
Hideaway Grassroots.
Hideaway Grassroots is here. Are there any other leaders, organizational leaders from different areas here? Okay. Well, see John, see Joanne, become part of their organization, support them, get out and spread the word. I know I have some comrades over here from Henderson County, and I'm slowly been moving. George was with me. We brought John Furlow when we met with our county judge, and so we're starting to make room in Henderson County for y'all to know that we're trying to pick up momentum there too. Okay, next question.
I'm not quite sure what this is. What should we replace it at all the IRS with?
That's a good question. If we go back to the founding fathers, and we go back to the original Constitution before the purported, and I'm going to say purported enactment of the 16th Amendment, which we've now proven for a fact was signed into law fraudulently. Okay? The 16th Amendment was never ratified. Okay, that's now an established fact. And the courts have held, well, it's been around so long, it's a political problem, we can't address that. That's their excuse. But what they did, and what was supposed to happen, is the tax bill from the federal government is supposed to go to the states. And the states then can say, you're spending too much money. We're not giving you that. See how that works? That's nice, because the states then control that purse, don't they? And so you don't replace the IRS at all. We let the tax money come to our state where it belongs first, and if our state wants to fund certain aspects for the duties that we, the people, agree Congress to have, some of them over in that column I showed you, the war powers, we need a Navy, we need an Army. They're not supposed to be standing, but they need to be ready and be able to be called, right? We need some administrative powers and stuff, but it's fairly small what the federal government needs to be. And when they start spending too much, the states can say, we're not paying that much. We're first keeping the money at home, and then the excess or what we think we need for the federal government to provide, they can provide. And that's how the system used to work. We, the people, very rarely had any dealings whatsoever with the federal government. We, the people, only dealt with our state government. And our state government was big enough to tell the guys up in D.C., you're getting too much. Well, they perverted the laws, as I just demonstrated in some of these videos you saw. They perverted the laws to the point where they want all of us to first and foremost be federal servants to the masters there in D.C., and second of all, citizens to our great state.
How close are we to a paperless society?
Well, that's interesting too, because 60 Minutes, it was the CBS Sunday morning program. I record that program every Sunday, and I watch it sometime during the week. CBS Sunday morning program, I believe, is the federal government's trial balloon test. And they run programs, and you can see what they're thinking. As a matter of fact, the programs they show normally will, this almost identical segment, maybe slightly tweaked, will show up 6 months to a year later on 60 Minutes. So if you want to know what's really happening, first they throw up these trial balloons. And when you're talking about paperless, one of the things they're trying to do is they're trying to get to paperless money. Because the law, as I just quoted before, says Federal Reserve notes shall be redeemable. If you go and you look at the financial reports, like from the Federal Reserve Bank, and what David Walker, who used to be the comptroller of currency, the reason he quit was because we were so out of kilter. According to David Walker, at least through August 2005, the number of notes, the total face value of notes that existed at that point in time could all be redeemed for gold or silver. We had a balance to cover that. Now, that was the paper notes. But the face value of the electronic currency is about 3 orders of magnitude. And in other words, there's about 1,000 times more promises to pay something with these electrons than there are paper notes. And now there's more paper notes in existence than there is gold and silver to cover it. So we have fractional reserve banking on top of fractional reserve banking. So to answer your question, they are trying as fast as they can to get us to a pure electronic currency. So that way, there are no notes, and you have no right to make a demand for lawful money because you're not a note holder any longer. So how soon is it coming? If the children have their way with their smartphones and stuff, it'll be here next week. If we can educate them enough to the dangers of that, we can postpone it perhaps indefinitely.
I've heard no one has been allowed to actually see the gold in Fort Knox. Is this true, and is the gold still there?
Well, that is true. Ron Paul has been asking for many years to have an audit of the gold that's in Fort Knox. Whether it's there or not is kind of immaterial to me because from the Federal Reserve's own website, as well as the Department of Treasury's, in the Office of Inspector General out of the Department of Treasury, I was able to get an accounting, which George and John, I will send you that, and you can distribute, and Joanne, I'll send it to you too, and you can distribute that out or put it up on your website, and it shows you, it's very interesting what it shows you. It shows you the amount of gold that belongs to the United States that's being held by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Okay? So you can see there what we have and see how it's accounted for, and it may scratch your head to say, well, this is interesting. The numbers don't quite make sense because the gold that they're showing has to be valued at $42 2/9 a troy ounce. And how can that be? Gold, of course, is like $1,400 today, somewhere around there. $1,300. Okay? So how could it be at $42 2/9? Well, I'll tell you how. This goes back to what we talked about at the beginning on the monetary system. A dollar is defined as a weight of silver. And that weight of silver has the value in raw gold of 42 to 1. And if you assay it, you mint it, and then transport it, be able to distribute to all the locations throughout the country, they reckon it's at 50 to 1. So a minted coin is $50 of gold of the same weight of silver. But that's where those values come from, and that Congress regulated. And they have to account for that way. And that's in the law, Title 31, Section 5117. Title 31, Section 5117 specifically says that the Secretary has to account for all gold holdings at $42 2/9 a fine troy ounce. Isn't that interesting? So the law requires it, but we the people don't know it. Next.
We're running out of time.
Okay.